Experience life in Jericho in the time of Jesus. 24 hours in the ancient Oasis city. What did ordinary people actually see when they woke in this desert town 2,000 years ago? What sounds filled the narrow streets before the sun crested the Judean hills? How did water, flowing from springs that defied the surrounding wasteland, shape every decision, every transaction, every breath taken in this impossible garden? Could you survive even one day in a world where the line between abundance and desolation measured less than a stone's throw? And if you stood at the city gates, as dawn broke over the Jordan Valley, would you recognize anything human in the patterns of survival unfolding before you? You expect ancient Jericho to feel distant, primitive, incomprehensible. You expect robes and rituals and a world so foreign it might as well be fiction. But that expectation crumbles the moment you understand what this city actually was. Jericho was not a relic. It was a crossroads, a place where Roman taxation met Jewish tradition, where desert caravans paused before the climb to Jerusalem, where the poorest day laborers and the wealthiest tax collectors shared the same water source, the same dust, the same brutal sun. This was not a city frozen in time. This was a city where time moved faster than anywhere else in Judea, where fortunes changed between sunrise and sunset, where the pressure of empire and tradition and geography created something you will recognize immediately once you see it clearly. By the end of these 24 hours, you will understand how proximity to water could mean the difference between eating and starving, how the acoustics of stone alleyways carried information faster than any messenger, how the smell of baking bread at dawn became a form of currency, how exhaustion, negotiation, and hope structured every waking moment. You will see that the distance between your life and theirs is not measured in centuries, but in the thickness of walls, the reliability of systems, the stability of the ground beneath your feet. The first hour begins before light. You are standing in a courtyard that opens to the east, waiting for the pre-dawn glow that will signal the start of movement in this city of 8,000 souls. The air is cool, almost cold, a brief mercy before the heat descends. You can hear the sound of stone grinding against stone from the house next to yours. Someone is already awake, crushing grain between a heavy upper stone and a fixed lower one, the rhythmic scraping a kind of percussion that will continue for the next 2 hours. This is not optional work. This is survival math. A family of 6 requires roughly 2 pounds of flour per day. Producing that flour by hand, using a saddle quern, takes 3 hours of sustained physical effort. The work begins before dawn because the day ahead will be consumed by other necessities, and because the coolness makes the repetitive motion slightly less unbearable. You step into the alley. The limestone walls on either side are close enough that you could touch both simultaneously if you extended your arms. The surface is rough, uneven, built from local stone that holds the cold of night and releases it slowly. Above, the sky is shifting from black to deep blue. No streetlights exist, no ambient glow from distant buildings. The darkness here is total until it is not, and the transition happens faster than your eyes expect. You can smell smoke. Not the clean wood smoke of a campfire, but the dense, oily smoke of dung fuel, mixed with olive wood and whatever dried brush could be gathered from the wadi beds. This is the smell of every morning in Jericho. This is the smell of cooking, of warmth, of the daily negotiation with scarcity. The first voices you hear are women's voices, low and practical, discussing the day's bread, not discussing the recipe or the flavor, but calculating. How much flour remains from yesterday's grinding? How much water can be spared? How hot should the clay oven be to bake efficiently without wasting fuel? These are not culinary decisions. These are engineering problems solved daily by people who have no margin for error. A miscalculation means hunger. Not the mild discomfort of missing a meal, but the grinding physical sensation that makes every task harder, every decision slower, every interaction more fragile. You move toward the sound of water. Jericho exists because of springs. Aina Sultan, the spring of Elisha, produces roughly 1,000 gallons per minute, a volume that seems impossible given the desert that surrounds the city on 3 sides. The water emerges from the ground at a constant temperature, cool and clear, and flows through channels carved into the limestone, distributed according to systems that predate Rome, that predate the Hasmoneans, that stretch back to a time when the engineering principles were discovered through trial and catastrophic error. You can hear the water before you see it. A rushing sound that means everything to the people here. A sound that represents the single reason this city exists in a landscape that would otherwise support nothing larger than a nomadic camp. The channel is cut into the street, a narrow trough lined with stone. You kneel beside it, watching the flow. The water is moving fast, directed toward the agricultural terraces on the eastern edge of the city. These terraces produce dates, figs, balsam, grain. The economic foundation of Jericho is not abstract. It is this water flowing at this rate, reaching these specific fields at this specific time. The entire city is a machine designed to convert spring water into food and trade goods. Every decision about construction, about street layout, about who lives where, is subordinate to the hydraulic logic that keeps this machine functioning. A man approaches carrying 2 large clay jars, suspended from a wooden yoke across his shoulders. He is a water carrier, one of dozens who will spend the day moving water from the public channels to the private courtyards of households that can afford to pay. His shoulders are broad, his posture curved from years of bearing weight. He does not greet you. He is focused on the delicate balance required to move 50 pounds of water without spilling, without stumbling on the uneven stones, without losing momentum that would make the load feel even heavier. This is skilled labor, physical work that requires precise body mechanics and an intimate knowledge of every crack and rise in the street surface. You follow him into a residential quarter where the houses are slightly larger, built around central courtyards with enough space for a small garden, a cooking area, storage rooms. These are not wealthy homes, but they represent a level of stability that most residents do not achieve. The water carrier delivers his load, receives a small copper coin, and moves back toward the channel. The transaction is wordless, routine, a brief node in an economic network that will complete thousands of similar exchanges before sunset. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel, because what you're about to witness in the next hours will completely reshape how you understand what daily survival actually required, and you will not want to miss a single detail of this reconstruction. The sun breaks the horizon. The temperature begins its climb immediately, a climb that will not stop until mid-afternoon when the heat reaches levels that make outdoor labor dangerous. You can see the city now. Jericho is not built upward. It spreads horizontally, a dense cluster of single-story structures with occasional 2-story buildings reserved for wealthier families or commercial purposes. The roofs are flat, made of wooden beams covered with packed clay and straw. These roofs are not purely structural. They are living space, sleeping areas during hot months, storage for produce, work surfaces for tasks that benefit from sunlight and air movement. Movement increases. You see children emerging from doorways, sent on errands before the heat intensifies. They carry messages, small purchases, items borrowed or returned. They are barefoot, dressed in simple tunics, their skin darkened by sun exposure that begins in infancy. They are not playing. They are working, integrated into the economic life of their households in ways that will seem invisible until you understand how every task requires multiple people coordinating without formal communication, relying instead on shared understanding of what needs to happen when. A woman walks past carrying a basket of dates on her head. The basket is woven from palm fronds, the dates still attached to their stems, clustered in heavy bunches that represent months of agricultural labor. Dates are the primary crop of Jericho. They require minimal water once established, produce massive yields, store well, and command high prices in Jerusalem and beyond. This woman is not the grower. She is a trader, moving product from the groves to the market, calculating her margin in a mental ledger that accounts for transport costs, spoilage risk, competitor pricing, and the mood of potential buyers. Her entire livelihood depends on this calculation being correct. You reach the central market area as full morning light floods the streets. The market is not a dedicated building or plaza. It is a section of the main thoroughfare that widens slightly, providing enough space for sellers to set up temporary stalls, spread cloth on the ground, arrange goods in ways that attract attention without blocking foot traffic. The noise level increases dramatically. Sellers calling out prices, buyers negotiating, children shouting messages, animals making their presence known. Donkeys loaded with goods from the Jordan Ford, chickens in woven cages, goats tethered to posts, waiting to be sold for meat or milk or breeding. The smells intensify. Fresh bread from a baker who operates a commercial clay oven, larger and hotter than household ovens, capable of producing hundreds of loaves per day. Dried fish from the Jordan or the Dead Sea, salt-preserved, pungent, a protein source for those who cannot afford fresh meat. Olive oil in large clay jars, the smell rich and slightly bitter, the oil thick enough to coat your fingers if you touch the rim. Spices brought by caravan from further east, small quantities of cumin, coriander, mustard seed, sold by weight using bronze scales that require calibration stones to ensure accuracy. You watch a transaction unfold. A buyer approaches a grain seller, examines the wheat by running his hand through it, checking for moisture, for insect damage, for the presence of chaff that would indicate poor winnowing. The seller waits, saying nothing, letting the quality speak. The buyer names a price. The seller counters. They do not shout or gesture dramatically. They speak in low tones, each calculating whether the other has room to move, whether walking away would cost more than conceding, whether this transaction is one of many or represents a significant portion of the day's business. The negotiation takes 5 minutes. They settle on a price between the original offers. Grain changes hands. Coins are counted carefully. Both parties leave without indicating satisfaction or dissatisfaction, simply moving to the next task. You notice the presence of Roman soldiers. Not many, perhaps 4 or 5 visible from where you stand, but their presence changes the atmosphere. They are not actively patrolling. They are watching, positioned at key intersections, ensuring that the flow of commerce continues without disruption, that taxes are collected, that no one challenges the fundamental arrangement that keeps Jericho operating as a tributary of Rome. Their armor is visible even in civilian dress, a mark of authority that requires no explanation. People adjust their paths to avoid getting too close, not out of fear exactly, but out of an understanding that any interaction with Roman authority carries risk disproportionate to any potential benefit. A tax collector operates from a small table under a fabric awning. He is local, Jewish, employed by the Roman system to extract revenue from his own community. His position is profitable and despised. He records transactions in a wax tablet, calculating percentages, collecting coins, providing no receipts, relying on memory and reputation to ensure compliance. You watch people approach him with visible reluctance, their body language tight, their faces neutral. They pay what is demanded. They do not protest. Protest is expensive. Protest draws attention. Attention from Roman authorities can result in consequences that extend far beyond the immediate transaction. You see the stratification clearly now. Wealth in Jericho is visible in clothing quality, in the presence of servants, in the ability to conduct business without visible physical labor. A merchant passes wearing a fine linen tunic, dyed indigo, a color that requires expensive processing and signals resources. He is accompanied by 2 men who carry nothing but walk close, their role clearly protective rather than commercial. This merchant does not negotiate personally. He sends subordinates to handle transactions while he observes, calculating broader patterns, deciding which goods to buy in volume, which markets to target, which risks to take. The heat is building. You can feel it radiating from the stone walls, from the packed earth beneath your feet. The pace of market activity slows slightly as people seek shade, as conversations move under awnings and into the narrow alleyways where the sun cannot reach directly. This is the pattern that will repeat daily, the rhythm of human activity adjusted to environmental conditions that cannot be controlled, only accommodated. A storyteller has gathered a small crowd. He is not performing fiction. He is recounting history, religious narrative, stories that reinforce communal identity, and provide frameworks for understanding the world. His voice carries well, trained to project without shouting. He uses repetition, rhythmic language, pauses for effect. The audience does not react with surprise. They know these stories. They are listening for variation, for emphasis, for the way the teller shapes familiar material to comment on present circumstances. This is information transfer in a culture where literacy is limited to specialists, where memory and oral tradition carry the weight of education, where the ability to speak publicly is a form of power. You move away from the market, following the sound of hammering. You find a workshop where a carpenter is constructing a door frame. The wood is local acacia, hard and termite-resistant, worked with bronze tools that require constant sharpening. The carpenter is measuring by eye and hand, using proportions learned through apprenticeship rather than written specifications. The door frame must fit an irregular opening in a limestone wall. There is no standardization. Every piece is custom, every joint is adjusted on site, every problem is solved through direct observation and physical adjustment. This is not primitive. This is expertise, knowledge that cannot be written down because it exists in the body, in the hands, in the ability to see a piece of wood and understand how it will behave when cut and stressed and exposed to varying humidity. Leave a comment right now with the phrase, "I would have been a water carrier," because if you truly understand the physical reality of this world, you know that survival here required a kind of strength that we have completely forgotten. You continue walking. The residential areas away from the market are quieter, though never silent. You can hear conversations through open doorways, the sounds of domestic work, the occasional cry of an infant. These are not private spaces in the modern sense. Walls are thin, courtyards are shared. The concept of solitude does not exist for most residents. You live in constant acoustic awareness of your neighbors, your family, your community. Secrets are difficult. Reputation is everything. Social enforcement of norms happens through observation and gossip, through the knowledge that deviation from expected behavior will be noticed and discussed and remembered. You see a woman weaving at a vertical loom set up in a courtyard. The loom is simple. 2 upright posts with a crossbeam, the warp threads hanging down weighted with stones. She passes the weft thread back and forth, beating it tight with a wooden tool, creating cloth from wool or linen thread that was spun by hand. This process, from raw fiber to finished cloth, represents hundreds of hours of labor distributed across multiple people. The woman at the loom is the final stage of production, but she depends on shepherds who raised the sheep, shearers who removed the wool, processors who cleaned and carded the fiber, spinners who created the thread. She is not working alone. She is the visible node in a production network that involves most of the women in her extended family and immediate community. The rhythm of her work is steady, repetitive, precise. She does not look at the cloth as she works. Her hands know the feel of the tension, the spacing of the threads, the correct amount of force required to beat the weft tight without distorting the weave. This is expertise acquired over years, starting in childhood, refined through constant practice. The cloth she produces is not luxury fabric. It is serviceable material for everyday clothing, rough but durable, the kind of cloth that will survive years of wear and washing and repair. Mid-morning. The heat is significant now. You seek shade under a sycamore fig tree at the edge of the agricultural terraces. From here you can see the full extent of the date groves, row after row of tall palms, their fronds creating a canopy that provides shade for smaller crops grown beneath. These are not wild trees. These are cultivated, carefully managed, their production maximized through irrigation scheduling, pruning, pollination assistance. Workers move among the trees, checking for pests, adjusting water flow, harvesting dates from the lower clusters. The terraces are remarkable engineering. They step down the gentle slope, each terrace wall built from stacked stone, each level capturing and holding soil that would otherwise wash away during the rare but intense winter rains. The irrigation channels run along the top edge of each terrace, distributing water evenly through small gates that can be opened or closed to direct flow where needed. This system is maintained collectively. No single family could afford to build or repair these structures. The entire community depends on their function, which means maintenance is constant, coordinated, enforced through social pressure and practical necessity. You watch a farmer adjusting a gate mechanism. He is not young. His face is weathered, his hands scarred from decades of work. He moves with economy, no wasted motion, every action purposeful. He is not thinking about the broader system. He is focused on this specific gate, this specific flow rate, this specific section of his date grove. But his action is part of a larger pattern, a collective management system that has kept Jericho productive for generations. The temperature continues climbing. You can feel sweat evaporating almost instantly in the dry air, leaving salt residue on your skin. This is the edge of hydration risk. Without constant water intake, the body begins failing rapidly in this environment. Everyone who works outside during these hours understands this viscerally. They drink from clay jars kept in shade, they pace themselves, they know the signs of heat exhaustion and heat stroke. They watch each other for symptoms that require immediate intervention. A child approaches offering you water from a clay cup, expecting a small coin in return. This is not charity. This is commerce. Water sellers operate throughout the city during hot months, providing hydration to those who cannot or will not return home. The water is spring-fed, clean, cool from being stored in earthenware that allows slight evaporation. You drink. The sensation is immediate relief, a physical reset that makes the heat slightly more bearable. You pay the child, who moves on to the next potential customer, repeating this transaction dozens of times per day, earning money that will contribute to household survival. You return toward the city center, following a different route that takes you past a fuller's workshop. The smell hits you before you see the building. Fullers process cloth, cleaning, whitening, thickening the fabric through a process that involves urine, alkaline salts, and sustained physical labor. The workers here stand in large stone vats, treading cloth underfoot, the ammonia smell overwhelming. This is necessary work and deeply unpleasant. The fullers are compensated well relative to unskilled labor, but they occupy a social position complicated by the nature of their trade. They are needed and avoided, respected for their skill and kept at distance because of the smell that clings to them. The workshop is built at the edge of the residential area, downwind when the prevailing winds blow from the west. Even so, nearby residents complain. The fullers ignore the complaints. They have nowhere else to go. The water channels they need for rinsing are fixed. The stone vats are permanent. The business existed here before the current generation of neighbors, and it will exist here after. This is another pattern you will see repeatedly. Infrastructure determines possibility, and individuals adapt to infrastructure rather than infrastructure adapting to individual preference. Hit the like button if you are starting to understand that every modern convenience you take for granted represents the elimination of a specific daily hardship that defined existence in places like this. Noon approaches. The sun is directly overhead. Movement slows dramatically. Many workshops close during the hottest hours, workers retreating to whatever shade they can find, eating a midday meal, resting until the temperature drops enough to resume labor. This is not laziness. This is survival strategy evolved over generations, the recognition that pushing through peak heat results in injury, illness, and death at rates that make the practice economically unsustainable. You find yourself in a courtyard where a family is sharing a meal. They sit on woven mats under a canopy made from palm fronds. The food is simple. Bread, olive oil, dried figs, a few small fish, water mixed with vinegar to make it more refreshing. They eat with their hands, breaking bread into pieces, dipping it in oil, eating slowly. This is not leisure. This is necessary caloric intake, fuel for the afternoon's work. But there is a quality of rest here, a brief suspension of the day's demands, a moment of collective pause. The conversation is quiet, practical. Discussing which tasks remain for the day, which neighbor needs help with a roof repair, which child should be sent to the market for vegetables. These are not profound topics. These are the logistics of continuation, the endless small decisions that, in aggregate, determine whether a household thrives or fails. A baby sleeps in a basket, the mother occasionally waving a fan made of woven reeds to keep insects away and provide slight air movement. The baby is swaddled tightly, a practice that limits movement but provides security and parents believe helps bones grow straight. The mother is not focused solely on the child. She is participating in the conversation, contributing to decisions, while simultaneously monitoring the baby's breathing, position, comfort. This is the divided attention required of women here, the constant management of multiple simultaneous demands. The afternoon begins. The heat remains intense, but work resumes because it must. You follow a group of laborers hired for the day to help with harvest work in the date groves. They are paid in coin and food, a wage that will barely cover their immediate needs but provides enough to survive another day. They do not negotiate. The wages are set by custom and market conditions. Either you accept the terms, or you go without income, which means you go without food, which means you and your family suffer. The work is physical and repetitive. Climbing ladders propped against palm trunks, cutting date clusters with bronze knives, lowering the heavy bunches in baskets to workers on the ground. The palm trunks are rough, difficult to grip, the ladder rungs worn smooth from years of use. Every climb carries risk. A fall from height could mean broken bones, disability, inability to work, which cascades rapidly into catastrophic household failure. The workers move carefully, deliberately, aware of the stakes. You watch a young man lose his grip on a date cluster. The heavy bunch falls, striking a worker below on the shoulder. The impact is significant, enough to knock the man down. For a moment, there is silence. Everyone stops, watching to see if the injury is serious. The man stands, rotating his shoulder, assessing damage. He is bruised but functional. Work resumes. The young man who dropped the cluster says nothing. The injured man says nothing. The incident is simply absorbed into the day's events, a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong, how little margin exists for error. The landowner appears, walking through the grove, inspecting progress. He does not work. He observes, calculates yield, decides whether the pace is acceptable. He is not cruel, but he is not generous. He is managing a business where profit margins are slim, where crop failure or market fluctuations can wipe out a year's income, where every decision must account for risk layered upon risk. He speaks briefly with the foreman, discussing which trees to prioritize, which dates are ripe enough to harvest, which should wait. The conversation is technical, focused on optimizing value extraction from this resource that represents his primary asset. You move away from the groves as afternoon light begins to soften. The heat is still intense, but the quality changes, the sun's angle shifting, shadows lengthening. You walk toward the area where potters work, following the smell of wood smoke from kilns. Pottery production is essential infrastructure. Every household requires clay vessels for water storage, cooking, serving food, storing grain. These vessels break regularly, requiring constant replacement. The potters are busy, their wheels spinning, their hands shaping wet clay into forms that repeat patterns established over centuries. A master potter works with focused intensity, his hands moving in ways that seem impossible to coordinate consciously. He is creating a large storage jar, building up the walls in stages, allowing each section to firm slightly before adding height. The clay is local, dug from specific deposits, mixed with water and grit to achieve the right plasticity. The potter knows the material intimately, can feel when the moisture level is correct, when the clay is too soft or too stiff, when the form is stable enough to continue building. His apprentice watches, learning through observation, occasionally attempting to replicate the master's movements on smaller pieces. The apprentice's work is clumsy, uneven, the walls too thick, the shape irregular. The master says little. He shapes the apprentice's failed attempts back into raw clay, demonstrates again, expects the apprentice to continue trying. This is education through repetition, through the gradual development of muscle memory and tactile sensitivity that cannot be explained, only acquired through thousands of hours of practice. The kilns are large beehive structures built from clay and stone, capable of reaching temperatures high enough to vitrify the clay, making it waterproof and durable. Firing is an all-day process, requiring constant attention to fuel supply, temperature management, airflow. The potters work in teams, coordinating to ensure the kiln operates efficiently, that fuel is not wasted, that the pottery inside fires evenly. A failed firing means lost time, lost materials, lost income. Success requires expertise and attention that cannot lapse for even brief periods. Share this with someone who thinks modern life is stressful, because they need to understand what stress actually looked like when survival was negotiated daily with no safety net and no margin for failure. Evening approaches. The temperature begins dropping noticeably. The city shifts again, activity patterns changing as people prepare for the final tasks of the day. Women gather at the public water channels, washing cooking vessels, filling jars for overnight use, exchanging information about tomorrow's market, about family matters, about community news. This is the social network, the communication system that operates parallel to formal economic and political structures, often more influential than either because it shapes reputation, allocates social capital, enforces norms through inclusion or exclusion. You watch a group of older women, their authority visible in their posture, their central position in the gathering, the way younger women defer to their opinions. These women are repositories of practical knowledge, midwives who have delivered most of the children in this quarter, healers who understand which herbs address which ailments, advisors who mediate family disputes, matchmakers who arrange marriages. Their power is real but uncodified, exercised through relationships rather than formal position. A young woman asks for advice about a sick child. The older woman asks detailed questions, listens carefully, touches the young woman's forehead to assess anxiety levels, makes a suggestion involving a specific plant preparation and a change in diet. She does not charge for this advice. She is building obligation, creating a network of reciprocal relationships that will provide support when she needs it, that will ensure her position remains secure as she ages and becomes more dependent on community care. You follow the sound of bleating toward a pen where sheep are being gathered for the night. The shepherd is a boy, perhaps 12 years old, responsible for the flock during daylight hours, bringing them back to safety before darkness makes them vulnerable to predators and thieves. He counts them by eye, checking for injuries, ensuring none are missing. His competence is striking. He is performing work that adults depend on, managing assets that represent significant wealth, doing so with a level of responsibility that would be considered inappropriate for someone his age in most modern contexts. The sheep are crucial to the local economy. They provide wool for cloth, milk for dairy products, meat for special occasions, manure for fuel and fertilizer. They are not pets. They are production assets, managed carefully, their health monitored constantly, their reproduction controlled to maximize yield. The boy understands this implicitly. He has been working with sheep since he could walk, learning through direct participation in the rhythms of animal husbandry that structure rural life. Dusk. The light is golden, warm, forgiving. The city looks different now, softer, the harsh edges of stone and dirt and poverty blurred by horizontal light that makes everything briefly beautiful. This is the moment when work stops, when families gather, when the day's outcomes are assessed, and tomorrow's plans are made. You can smell cooking fires starting, the smoke rising from hundreds of individual courtyards, each family preparing the evening meal, the final major task of the day. You enter a home where you have been invited to observe the evening routine. The family is preparing the meal collectively. The man has returned from his labor, a day spent on a construction project in Jerusalem, the walk there and back adding hours to his workday. He is exhausted. His body used hard, his hands scraped and calloused. He washes in water brought from the channel, the act of cleaning a transition from work to rest, from public to private, from the demands of labor to the responsibilities of family. The woman is managing the cooking, directing children to fetch items, to fan the fire, to prepare the sleeping area. She has been working since before dawn, grinding grain, baking bread, managing water supply, mending clothing, caring for children, negotiating with neighbors, maintaining the countless systems that keep the household functioning. Her exhaustion is as profound as her husband's, though her labor leaves fewer visible marks. She does not complain. Complaint accomplishes nothing. She manages, adapts, finds ways to reduce effort without reducing output, leverages relationships to share burdens, calculates constantly how to extend resources that never feel adequate. The meal is eaten in near silence, not from tension, but from tiredness. The food is consumed efficiently, the focus on refueling bodies that will resume work tomorrow. The children eat quickly, eager to finish so they can play briefly before sleep. Their play is not organized or supervised. They run in the alleyways, creating games from found objects, negotiating rules without adult intervention, developing social skills through direct conflict and resolution. Full darkness arrives quickly in this latitude. The city transforms. Without artificial light, activity contracts to small circles around oil lamps and cooking fires. The temperature drops further, the desert air releasing heat rapidly once the sun is gone. You can hear the city quieting, conversations softening, movement slowing. This is not by choice. This is the constraint of darkness in a world without effective artificial lighting. Oil for lamps is expensive. Candles are luxury items. Most households simply adapt their sleep schedules to match daylight availability, rising when light appears, sleeping when it disappears. You step into the alley one final time. The darkness is profound, the stars visible with a clarity that seems impossible, the Milky Way a dense band across the sky. You can hear night sounds, dogs barking, a baby crying, the low murmur of conversation from a home where an oil lamp still burns. The air smells of smoke and stone, and the faint sweetness of date flowers that bloom year-round in the groves. A man walks past carrying a small lamp, the light barely sufficient to illuminate his path. He is returning from a gathering, a discussion of communal business that extended past sunset. He walks carefully, feeling his way along the wall, moving through memory of the route rather than vision. This is normal. This is how movement happens after dark for those who must travel. The danger is real. A misstep can result in a fall, a turned ankle, an encounter with someone who might present a threat. But the risk is calculated against necessity, and sometimes necessity wins. You find a place to stop and observe. From this position, you can see portions of several courtyards where oil lamps provide small pools of light. In one, a man is praying, his voice low and rhythmic, reciting passages from memory, the words shaped by centuries of repetition. This is not exceptional behavior. This is daily practice for many residents, the reinforcement of religious identity, the maintenance of connection to tradition that provides meaning and structure and communal belonging in a world where those things are essential for psychological survival. In another courtyard, a woman is nursing an infant, the act casual and functional, no privacy required or expected. This is life process, managed openly, integrated into the flow of evening activity. Other children sleep nearby on mats, their bodies relaxed in the boneless way of exhausted children, their breathing steady. The woman will sleep soon, but not yet. She has tasks remaining, preparations for tomorrow that cannot wait. You realize you are witnessing the compression of time. Every action here serves multiple purposes. Every object has multiple uses. Every relationship carries multiple obligations. There is no waste because waste cannot be afforded. There is no inefficiency because inefficiency means vulnerability. The entire system operates at a level of optimization forced by constraint, where comfort and convenience have been stripped away, leaving only what is absolutely necessary for continuation. Before you finish watching, I need you to do something. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel. Make sure notifications are on. Hit the like button so this reaches more people who need to understand what daily existence actually required before modern systems provided the buffer we now take for granted. And leave a comment right now saying, "I watched until here." Because I want to know who really engages with this kind of deep reconstruction, who is willing to sit with the discomfort of understanding how much has changed and how recently. Share this video with someone who romanticizes the past because they need to see the reality behind the nostalgia. The past was not simpler. It was harder in ways we have systematically forgotten. 24 hours in Jericho. You have seen one rotation of the sun, one cycle of the patterns that repeated daily for the people who lived in this oasis city 2,000 years ago. You have walked the streets at dawn, felt the heat at midday, witnessed the work that filled every waking hour, observed the networks of obligation and reciprocity that held the community together, watched as darkness forced everything to stop. And if you pay attention to what you have seen, you will understand something crucial about the nature of human adaptation, about the ways people create meaning and structure in circumstances that offer neither comfort nor certainty, about the distance between security and precarity, measured not in failures of character or lapses of effort, but in the presence or absence of systems that buffer individual misfortune. This was not a primitive world. This was a world operating under different constraints, solving different problems, optimizing for different outcomes. The people here were not less intelligent, less capable, less human than you. They were responding rationally to circumstances that demanded specific adaptations. Water shaped everything because water scarcity was the primary constraint. Labor was manual because energy sources were limited to human and animal muscle. Risk was managed collectively because individual failure had community consequences. Time was structured by light because artificial lighting was prohibitively expensive. When you recognize these patterns, when you see how environment and technology and social organization interact to create the texture of daily experience, you begin to understand that history is not a story of progress from darkness to light. History is a record of different equilibriums, different arrangements of possibility and constraint, different calculations about what matters most when not everything can be preserved. Jericho survived in the desert because it found an equilibrium that worked, that converted a reliable water source into food, trade goods, and cultural continuity. The equilibrium was fragile. It required constant maintenance. It broke regularly and had to be rebuilt. But it functioned well enough for long enough that thousands of people lived entire lives, raised children, created meaning, experienced joy and suffering, and the full range of human emotional experience within the boundaries it established. The distance between that world and yours is vast and narrow simultaneously. Vast because the material conditions are unrecognizable. Narrow because the fundamental human negotiations remain identical. You still need water, food, shelter, safety, connection, meaning. You still balance present needs against future risks. You still navigate relationships that involve obligation and reciprocity and trust. You still experience exhaustion, hope, fear, pride, shame, love. The structures that mediate these experiences have changed profoundly. The experiences themselves have not. What you witnessed in these 24 hours was not exotic. It was ordinary. It was the daily texture of existence for most humans throughout most of history, the baseline from which our current arrangement is the deviation. Understanding this does not require romanticizing hardship or dismissing the genuine improvements that modern systems provide. It requires acknowledging that the people who lived without those systems were fully human, fully complex, fully capable of sophistication and joy and creating lives worth living. They were not waiting to be rescued by modernity. They were living, adapting, surviving, thriving within the possibilities available to them. The lesson is not that we should return to that world. The lesson is that we should understand what we have constructed in its place, what we have gained and what we have traded, what new fragilities we have created while eliminating old ones. Every system has costs. Every comfort has dependencies. Every convenience obscures labor performed elsewhere, by others, under conditions we choose not to examine closely. Jericho 2,000 years ago made those costs visible because proximity and scale meant there was nowhere to hide them. Today those costs are distributed globally, processed through systems so complex that tracing them becomes a specialized skill, hidden behind interfaces designed for seamlessness and ease. You cannot go back. The world that made Jericho necessary no longer exists in that form, but you can remember, can keep the knowledge of that world alive, can use it to contextualize your own experience, to recognize that what feels permanent and natural is actually contingent and constructed, maintained by choices and systems that could be different. The 24 hours you just witnessed are gone. The forces that shaped them remain, transformed but not eliminated, continuing to structure possibility in ways that would be recognizable to the water carriers and grain grinders, and date harvesters, if they could somehow witness what their world became. This is what you came for. This is what understanding actually looks like when you strip away abstraction and sit with the specific, material, sensory reality of how people lived before the buffer zones got thick enough to make us forget what the world feels like without them.